friend Simon. I am Joan's youngest sister. Richard asked me to write a book, so I have. You guys get to hear the chapters of it. I had to make it longer because there's a lot to say. So, here goes. Joan is my oldest sister and the first of Dad's 5 children. I'm the youngest of the brood, and there's a 13-year age difference between us. And I'm speaking for Lee, Stan, and I. Lee, Stan, and I have spoken a lot about Joan's legacy this week, and I've incorporated their thoughts and mine in this talk. As a young child, I thought everyone had some siblings who lived with them, and some who didn't. While Joan and I never lived together, we shared many happy times together as sister, as family, and Joan was my very cool oldest sister. Stan reminds us how excited we'd get when Joan and Jim would visit. It was almost so much fun for us, and we were total pains in the butt for them. In the next few minutes, I want to share some happy times with Joan and our family. Before I get into the stories, a couple thoughts about our dad. His love for all of his children, including Ricky and Lori. It was unconditional and unwavering. As the youngest and the only one at home for a few years before college, I saw his devotion firsthand. He had a huge capacity for loving us, and his love for Joan was very strong indeed. In going through his correspondence and what he saved while closing down our mom's house, I read some of their letters to each other, the remembrances he saved, and the many pictures he had of all of us in his desk and in his wallet. It was always the 5 of us. As a teenager, I remember wanting to go out with my friends, and if Jim and Joan were coming over, Dad insisted I stay home to be with the family. We were together for family celebrations and events, Sunday dinners, fun at Northmore, dinner in the city at one of his favorite restaurants, the Cart, the Black Hawk, chances are the Pickle Barrel, maybe Willie's in Highwood. Dad always wanted us together, and those times were important to him. In hindsight, since he left us so early, many of my most important memories were with all of us. Those of you who knew him may remember that twinkle in his eyes. Joan is the only one who inherited that same twinkle, smile, and way about her. Every time I saw Joan, even at the end, I saw him. And that has always been very special to me, and I will miss it. Now I can be funny. Joan and I were part of different generations. I never thought Joan had a hippie bone in her body until this week. Lee told me a story about celebrating her 21st birthday with Joan, Ricky, Jimmy, and Lori. They took Lee and her boyfriend du jour to Butch McGuire's for her first legal drink. As they were leaving, Joan passed Lee a birthday card with a couple of joints in it. Who knew? Not me, and I was a cool high school senior by that time, and over 50 years later, I'm hearing about this? Okay. Joan was traditional with an independent streak and the first wave of professional independent women. Stockbroker, New York City, then realtor. She was our very own Marlo Thomas and that girl, and was part of the generation of women that paved a path for women like me to compete head-to-head in the business world. She was a great role model for me. Joan was the chicest member of the family, and when I said this to Lee, and I read this to Lee, she said, no, she wasn't. Yes, Lee, she was. There was never a hair out of place. She was beautifully coiffed, dressed, and put together. Our mother used to say, why can't you be more like Joan? And we said, it's 1968. We were fascinated by her. She had enormous style and grace. She was beautiful, sophisticated, exotic, generous, smart, savvy, nice, and oh so funny. And Joan was an integral part of the fabric of our lives. Joan always wanted to help us and be there for us, and she was always rooting for our successes. Some of our favorite stories. Joan secured a job for our sister Leah Rothschild as a file clerk one summer. And any of you who might know Lee know that working in an office, particularly a file room, was not her calling. She was almost fired by Mr. Carger for falling asleep in the file room after a big lunch. Joan always laughed about it. Joan and Ricky took Stan under their wing when he moved to Chicago for an internship at Freeling and Company. He'd go to their new house in Glencoe, often for dinner, and particularly loved holding and playing with Rory. He always talked about how much fun it was to be an uncle, and he loved the time he spent together. I believe it was those times together that made him such a terrific father. Stan was particularly happy when Joan greeted him with "Hello, handsome," every time she saw him. Joan and Ricky always welcomed us into their home, and when we were hanging out in high school, my high school friends and I used to stop by their apartment, mostly unannounced without notice. They always welcomed us with open arms and refrigerator. Bob and I got to see Joan in action as a realtor when she sold us our condo in Evanston. When the seller passed on our first offer and didn't counter, by the way, the offer wasn't that low. Joan schooled us to wait it out. "Don't be so anxious," she told us. She felt it was overpriced, it wouldn't sell quickly, then pounced when the price was reduced, and we bought it for less than we were initially willing to pay. She jumped from big sister mode to realtor mode and made sure that every aspect of the transaction went smoothly. We were very grateful for her help, and she bought us our first gas barbecue as a housewarming gift. Her generosity was extraordinary, and we loved it. One of my favorite days with Joan was August of 1973. I was about to start my sophomore year in college. Rory was about 9 months old, and I said I wasn't going to say that, but you threw up on me. But you were still an adorable baby. Joan and I were drinking iced tea on the patio on a balmy summer afternoon in the beautiful home Joan created on Crescent in Glencoe, playing with Rory. And then later that day, the entire family gathered and spent the evening together. Joan, Ricky, and Dad grilled together. It was a splendid, happy day and night, and one of the last times we were all together as a family before Dad got sick. My last visit with Joan was meaningful. She recognized me and greeted me warmly with a big, "Hi, kid, you look great." I knew she was sick. I was in yoga pants. There is no way Joan would have said, "You look great" in yoga pants. No way at all. We had a wonderful visit. We expressed our mutual love for each other. Joan enjoyed visiting with our dog Lucky Girl, who sat at her feet reveling in Joan's attention. And even though Lucky Girl's not a collie, when we adopted her, we were told she was part collie. She looks like a German Shepherd. She doesn't look like a collie. Joan introduced us to her future husband, to her boyfriend and future husband Ricky, on March 16th, 1968. 51 years later, she died on that day. They came out to honor Grandma Sylvia, our dad's mom, who had died the day before. Joan and Ricky came to Glencoe for the evening of condolence call. Ricky was a brave, brave man and wasn't scared off by us, and it was clear that Joan had found the love of her life. Their love was memorable and beautiful. A couple of weeks later, Joan called to tell Dad that they were engaged, and he twinkled through their wedding, their life at Sandburg, on Crescent, the birth of Rory, and he would have been so profoundly proud of the happy life she created with Ricky and Rory, her career in real estate, of course, and her achievements as a person. There are many more stories and remembrances of Joan in her life. They form a rich mosaic of love, family, friends, achievement, and a life well lived. Rest in peace, Joan. We love you, and we will carry you in our hearts forever.